Well, nearly 9 hours in counting, the Reserve Bank Board continues to be in a huddle at its headquarters in Mumbai amidst a public spat between the central bank and the government. All 18 members on the board of the Reserve Bank of India are in attendance. The current standoff is over a whole range of issues, but most crucial among them are about the central bank's reserves and the rules governing lending by banks saddled with bad loans, which basically comes under the umbrella of the prompt corrective action framework. Now, sources tell us that the first half of the meeting comprised of a presentation on capital reserves. This is what we are given to understand that a large part of the morning's time was spent on. Now, Congress President Rahul Gandhi taking to Twitter this morning, accusing the Modi government of attempting to destroy the Reserve Bank, urging Governor Patel and his team to have a spine and show the government its place. Well, Ritu Singh has been standing by outside the Reserve Bank headquarters from about 10 o'clock this morning. Remember, the meeting started at 10:30 this morning. Ritu, what's the sense that you're getting? Is this likely to be an all-nighter, or can we expect a decision sometime soon?
Well, Shireen, we're as eagerly awaiting for this board meeting to end as anybody else, and our eyes have been on that GOVT for, like you say, almost 9 hours now. And every now and then it opens, and we're hoping that the meeting would have ended. But, one of the board members, Sachin Chaturvedi, actually just left a few minutes back. He is one of the independent members on the board of Reserve Bank of India, but we're given to understand that the meeting has not yet concluded. So the other 17 members very much still inside, still in a huddle, so the board meeting is still continuing. We don't know how soon or how late it may end. So that's something we're still waiting to hear. But yes, many points of discussion, about 18 to 20 points of discussion on the agenda, most of which should have been covered today. And as Lata pointed out, RBI's capital reserves is something that dominated the first half of this meeting. And in the second half, there were several other issues ranging from prompt corrective action, relaxation, to, the Basel framework for public sector banks, etc., all of which were likely to be on the agenda. So we'll wait to hear what happens. But today's board meeting essentially carried forward the agenda from the last meeting in the month of October, which remained inconclusive and actually resulted, in a public spat between the regulator and the government. So we'll wait to hear how this one concludes, because if it comes to voting, the independent members will have a crucial role to play, and the RBI Governor Urjit Patel will have the casting vote.
All right, Ritu, we'll keep coming back to you as and when you have more information. Ritu Singh there, positioned right outside the Reserve Bank headquarters. And it's important, as Ritu was pointing out, one independent board member, Sachin Chaturvedi, has left. So as we were pointing out, 18 were there through the morning, but it's now down to 17. One independent board member has left that board meeting. Let's go back across now to Lata. Lata, you are given to understand that at least a significant part of this morning's meeting focused on the issue of surplus capital.
Yes, and considering that, the public statement made by Mr. Gurumurthy just about 2 days back, when he spoke, was that we are not looking at taking the Reserve Bank's capital. All we asked was for a framework. This was a similar refrain we got earlier from government officials as well, that it was other issues they were concentrating on. So considering that, it looks like nothing has been excluded from the board meeting. All the contentious issues remain on the table. And as Ritu mentioned very briefly, the prompt corrective action rules that bind the banks from giving too much loans, especially if they are too weak and have too many NPAs, that is definitely going to be an issue. Basel norms, which the government has made no secret of saying that it's higher than international standards, and therefore the minimum capital needs to be brought down. More liquidity needs to be provided. The finance minister just 48 hours ago made that statement public, and a package for SMEs, the sector for which Mr. Gurumurthy has long spoken. So the only point I want to leave on the table is none of these are so contentious that you can't arrive at a conclusion. So it does look like, there is a fundamental unwillingness to give on both sides. My sense is that with the induction of people like Mr. Gurumurthy, who are very vocal and who want to use the board position, the RBI as we know it, I think, is over. I think it's a new RBI altogether.
Well, we'll still have to wait to see whether some of those contentious issues or all of those contentious issues have indeed been discussed, deliberated upon, and a decision has been taken. There are some reports that also suggest that this could maybe spill over to tomorrow, but that is not something that we have been able to independently verify. In fact, our sources in North Block seem very certain that this will end this evening or later tonight. Well, let's go across now to Anant Narayan, Professor at SP Jain Institute of Management, Prabal Vasu Roy, of Sloan Fellow of the London Business School and the former corporate director as well. Very soon we'll be joined by Gemini Bhagwati, RBI Chair Professor at the Indian Council for Research in International Economic Research, and Surjit Bhalla, member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the show. Anant, let me start by asking you, the only piece that we have confirmed so far of what has gone on inside the Reserve Bank's board meeting, which has now gone on for over 9 hours, is the fact that there has been a discussion on the capital reserves issue. How much time was spent, we don't know, but we are given to understand that a better part of the morning's time was spent on that, and then there was a late lunch at about 3:30 or 3:45 this morning. Given what we had heard from the DEA secretary, his tweets, etc., suggesting that this was not, in a sense, a priority item, the fact that the morning addressed this issue, what does that tell you?
Look, for one thing, this long board meeting seems to suggest they all love each other and want to see themselves, each other for a long, long time. Jokes apart, look, while the DA secretary mentioned that this is not about reserves and giving a dividend out to the government, the moment you say you're trying to figure out the right capital framework for RBI, as an offshoot of that, if you're going to say that the capital required is far less than what's there on the balance sheet, as an offshoot, you're going to ask for a dividend. So, you can call it from one way or the other. Effectively, it is a way of trying to get money out of the RBI. Now, clearly, the fact that the meeting is going on for so long indicates that consensus probably is taking a long time to reach. The reality is, while all the issues on the table, whether it's NPAs and forbearance or PCA banks or those reserves on the RBI capital, these are contentious issues, but not really beyond a sensible compromise. Of course, there is a political imperative. Of course, there is an RBI academic and professional imperative. This is not the first time these questions have been raised. In the past, RBI and central bank have managed to reach a sensible compromise and move on. The only time we've figured out these things is when somebody writes their memoirs or gives an interview to you many, many moons later. Right? It's unfortunate that the issues seem to be really deep-seated beyond the professional into perhaps a personality level as well. Every single minister you speak to seems to have bad things to say about the RBI. The public speeches being made from the RBI are full of rancor. I do fear that even if we do smoke the peace pipe for now, that the issues are so deep-seated that we will remain on edge for a long time, Shireen.
Well, that I think is a fear that a lot of people have, and one was hopeful that perhaps at the end of this board meeting, the hope is that you're not just going to push these issues down the road further, but at least there should be some resolution on some of these contentious issues, as you said, a sensible compromise. But let me go across to Prabal. Prabal, what would your expectation be, of the host of issues? And again, we were given to understand by the likes of Mr. Gurumurthy, who publicly stated that all of these issues had in fact been agreed upon in the previous board meeting of the Reserve Bank of India, so he can't understand what the fuss is all about. But clearly, an over 9-hour meeting still underway, reviewing or re-looking at some of these contentious issues. Where do you expect, or where would you like to see a sensible compromise on which of these issues?
Well, Shireen, like you rightly said, Gurumurthy can say whatever he wants, but the fact that this meeting has been extended inordinately shows that the compromise is not it's not on the table yet. So there are contentious issues. See, from where I come from, and I've written about this in Hindustan Times this morning, there are effectively two issues which are big. One is the issue of the transfer of reserves. On that, I think, at least till such time, the risk framework is reworked one more time. We already have a risk framework in place. And we decide a capital adequacy framework, given the risks we face. I think that's a no-go. As far as I am concerned, that's something which is it's non-negotiable. The second thing which is non-negotiable in my mind is this whole issue of giving directions to the governor. I think the independence of the Reserve Bank governor, any central bank governor, is a must. And that is something I think we should not compromise on. This brings us to the third aspect, that is on the credit flow to the business. Those are places where I think, with a bit of communication, give and take, and understanding the problems being faced by especially the SME sector, I think some amount of liquidity windows, etc., could be created. However, as far as the PCA framework is concerned, even though the norms can be tweaked, but I think in terms of the bad banks which were sort of enlisted, I think the RBI is not far off the mark in terms of asking these banks which have low credit, low capital and high debts, not to lend further. So frankly, I think this is where I roughly stand from. As far as NBFC financing is concerned, I think even KK Mistry has said on your channel itself, and I see from the market as well, that there is no big crisis at the moment. So I think that's probably a non-issue. Okay. So that's how I would look at it, actually. Okay.
Well, we also have Professor Jaimini Bhagwati of ICRI here and Dr. Surjit Bhalla joining us now, both stalwarts in the area of Reserve Bank and monetary economics. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you very much for joining us. Professor Bhagwati, well, none of these issues, as our guests have been saying, the amount of restraints that should be kept placed on weak banks, or amount of liquidity in the system, or a package for SMEs are so contentious that middle ground can't be found. I want to ask you something else. Even the putting a person as strongly opinionated or an ideologue like Mr. S. Gurumurthy on the board, and his public speech, which is quite at a variance with the Reserve Bank's inflation targeting and MPC regime. He's speaking of practically an ideology where there should be the right of the government to print money, basically no curbs on fiscal deficit. Do you think we are now going to see a totally different Reserve Bank government polemics? The old RBI needs to be forgotten. A new order cometh.
I know for television channels, some amount of difference of opinion and should I say friction, it makes for good television. I have no opinion on what Mr. Gurumurthy is saying. It is for him to explain or amplify, defend his statements. I've already appeared on your television channel, and I think at this moment we should wait for this meeting to be over. But going back to your first point, that is this going to make the situation worsen or not? I think in any board or in any situation where a central bank or a government is involved, there are many people and there are many points of view. That is the way the world functions. No two people have exactly the same point of view. And one hopes that, saner counsel will prevail and people will look at the situation from a national interest point of view, not to royal markets, to be careful about capital adequacy, to be careful about liquidity, but at the same time be well aware that one needs to look at solvency issues so that you don't throw good money after bad.
No, I'd be very glad if my version is incorrect, but it does look like even putting such a strong person in the board, until now the board was largely advisory and I might even venture to say ornamental. We never even tried to find out who the members of the board were. And now the board clearly has a view, and it cannot have been an accident that the government has appointed a person with strong views on the board. They intend to make that voice heard. So, Mr. Bhalla, what is your sense? Do you think that there may be temporary peace today or tomorrow on some issues, but we are going to see, disagreement continue? Probably not frontal attack, but a guerrilla war.
Your last statement, sorry, I just joined, and so I heard Germany and I heard the tail end of the previous speaker. You said something about the new order cometh. And my view is this new order is a few years old. My, continuous argument, and this is in the newspapers, etc., has been that I've never seen a bank, central bank, run as tight a monetary policy as this RBI has done. And that's the new order. We don't have inflation. Inflation is not much of a problem. We do have, on the one hand, several experts claim as to how the economy is weak. If you look at the credit, forget large industries or medium, small, look at the total volume of credit that has gone to these industry over the last 4 years. In nominal terms, it's up about 2-3%. I mean, what economic logic dictates that we proceed in that fashion? Now, one economic logic I heard was that, listen, there's a lot of debt problems, and if you give more money, there'll be more debt. The last I heard was when there is a severe banking crisis, you do not starve the banks and the lenders for credit. It's like, the patient has got cancer. You say, okay, let's finish him off. So there has been a new order, something I have not been able to understand, the economics of it, as to why the RBI has been so aggressive in tightening. You had the economy slowing down, whether it was last year or this year, and the RBI and the MPC comes out and raises interest rates. Now, I know that none of this discussion is on, and you and I had this interchange last time, none of this discussion is on interest rates. But, interest rates is representative of tightening of credit. It's a shorthand. At least in the rest of the world, it is the most important shorthand to assess liquidity in the economy. Last point I want to make, we had the rupee in trouble, quote unquote, and the RBI intervened to defend the rupee, and it took more money out of the market than it brought into all more operations. Now, that has nothing to do with NBFCs, that has nothing to do with bad banks, that has nothing to do with NPAs. Why are they not just replacing that credit? So I think a new order is here. Maybe the new order is what India needs, but I think that's where the debate should be. Last point on, the board, and you're absolutely right. I had never heard of the RBI board or whatever, or members of the board. And who's to say that that was a right framework in this modern day and world? Why shouldn't the board be overseeing, ask questions? In India, especially, there's nobody who's sacrosanct in India. The Supreme Court is not sacrosanct. The politicians certainly are not sacrosanct. The industrialists are not certainly sacrosanct. But the one institution that is completely above criticism, and you media make it that way, is the RBI. So I think this is a very healthy development.
I think Lata would strongly disagree, sir.
And the RBI is one of them.
So would the RBI.
Yeah. Well,
I think Lata would strongly disagree with the fact that there has been no criticism of the RBI, sir. But I will tell you that that's been done quite often, sir. It's been done quite often. It's certainly not blasphemous here, but on the larger issue, and I just want to update our viewers, Mr. Bhalla, that one independent director, Sachin Chaturvedi, had already left, and we are given to understand that Sudhir Mankad, also an independent board member of the Reserve Bank, has also now left. So 2 out of the 18 have now left the board meeting. The board meeting continues at this point in time at the RBI headquarters. But Mr. Bhalla, monetary policy aside, let me ask you about the one issue that we know was discussed or taken up this morning, and that is perhaps one of the most contentious issues on reworking this framework on how to access the RBI's capital reserves. Now, the view that's been expressed by most people, especially the ones who have been on this panel and currently are on this panel, is that this is not a decision to be made today. This ought to be a decision that a high-level committee should look at, and certainly it should be a decision that the next government should take forward. As a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, what would your view be?
Well, I will give my views as me, Sujit Bhalla, rather than Sujit Bhalla, as a member of the PM's Advisory Council. I can only speak for myself. And I think what you said, I'm in complete agreement with. That I think it's a red herring, about the capital framework, usage, capital adequacy, and transfer reserves from the RBI. Sorry, not capital adequacy, but transfer reserves from the RBI. A committee should be set up. A committee should look at it and come up with a decision. In addition, I hope that there is a committee set up by the RBI on the old issue, which we keep visiting every 2-3 years, on debt management, whether the debt management should be housed within the RBI, and in that sense we are very, very unusual. Most economies in the world do not have the debt management housed in the central bank. It's an issue again. I don't know what the correct decision is, but it is something that should be debated, and discussed, and a committee should set up, just like you're saying, and I'm in complete agreement with, that the transfer of RBI capital should be given to a committee of experts and let them decide.
Okay. Professor Bhagwati, what do you think could be holding up? Issues like prompt corrective action, tinkering it with a little here or a little there if the government feels that it is way too constricting, or even for that matter, giving a package for SMEs. The RBI has done these things before. What, according to you, could be such a standoff that has, kept the two at loggerheads?
Well, you're assuming that they are at loggerheads. We don't have any evidence of that as of now. And I'm very happy that they are taking time. These are weighty issues. And if there are differences of opinion between two persons, it's important to
So we are not assuming anything. We are not assuming, sir. Viral Acharya's speech is in the public domain. And
No, I'm talking about today's board meeting.
Sorry.
Today's board meeting.
I'm sorry.
That it has been continuing for some time.
Okay.
So there are differences of opinion. There are differences of opinion between husbands and wives. It is natural for. If you look around the world, it is natural that there is a certain amount of tension and often differences of opinion between a central bank and a government.
Okay.
Right. I understand,
it is not
Mr. Bhagwati,
unusual.
If I may interrupt you, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, sir.
No, all I was saying was that I'm happy that they're taking time, and if necessary, let it continue till tomorrow. Let there be committees or subcommittees be set up to discuss, debate, and evaluate the technical issues. As far as the prompt corrective action is concerned, or for that matter, the February 2018 circular that RBI has issued, these are matters which cannot be kind of decided overnight. If the government has a slightly different point of view in terms of providing credit to MSMEs, that's fine. Let's people discuss and find out what exactly is the position. We need to figure out between M1, M2, M3, M4, where is the shortage in terms of liquidity? Why are NBFCs, if they are facing liquidity shortages, is it because they're not creditworthy enough? I think I mentioned this before. Or is it because, as Surjit was mentioning, some liquidity has been mopped up as a result of using FX reserves to defend the currency? So let's get some more numbers on this. Otherwise, it gets a little bit of a discussion in a vacuum. So it becomes
and you're right, sir. We hope that the fact that... True.
Sorry.
True, and you're right that perhaps the fact that they've gone on discussing these matters for almost 10 hours now is also an indication that thought is being given to each of these issues. But I want to pick up on the point that Surjit Bhalla made, and I want to come across the panel for your views, and I'll start by asking you, Mr. Bhagwati. What we are given to understand, and we don't know whether it has already been taken up or will be taken up during the course of this board meeting, this business of the government bringing in regulation to ensure that the RBI becomes a board-managed institution. Now, the reaction from the likes of the former Finance Minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram, or in fact, Mr. Maligam, who spent 21 years on the board of the Reserve Bank of India, was very clear that the RBI board operates under the RBI Act. It doesn't operate like a board of a company that operates under the Companies Act, and the powers of the RBI board need to stop at persuasion. It cannot direct the governor to act in a certain way. Mr. Bhalla seems to suggest that maybe the time has come for the RBI to be a board-managed institution. Your views, Mr. Bhagwati?
Absolutely not. And the not is with N capital, O capital, T capital. A central bank is not a company. And the framers of the RBI Act had thought it through. So if somebody feels X, Y, whoever, ultimately it is for Parliament to decide to amend the Act, because the Act makes it very clear that the powers of the governor are different from those of an MD or the chairman of a company. And if the RBI Act has to be amended, so let the Standing Committee of the Finance Ministry look at a draft that the Finance Ministry will propose of change in the legislation, and let it be discussed and debated in the Parliament, and if necessary, let the Act be amended. Till such time, and I personally feel there's nothing wrong with the Act in terms of the governor having a different set of powers than any head of company who is chosen by the board. I mean, the managing director and the chairman are selected by the board. In this particular case, the RBI governor and the deputy governors are selected through a process known as the Appointments Committee of the Cabinet, the ACC, of which the Prime Minister is the head. In this particular case, it's the Finance Minister who will propose. The Home Minister will clear from the security and intelligence angle, and the PM will approve. And this is a very, very different thing. Companies are not, heads are not chosen through the ACC process. So I would beg to differ from anyone who says that, the RBI should become just like any other company. It is not true of, I think, any central bank around the world. But without getting into what other countries are doing, we have an act. It's an act of parliament. That's what is the basis on which the RBI board has been set up, and that is the basis on which the RBI governor is chosen. So I think till such time as there is further discussion...
Live visuals...
Sorry.
Right. Live visuals on our screens of RBI board members exiting. We've just seen the Economic Affairs Secretary Subhash Chandra Garg exit the RBI headquarters. So more board members there exiting the Reserve Bank headquarters. This probably gives us some sense of whether we are headed to this meeting now concluding. So the DEA Secretary has now exited the RBI headquarters. The RBI board meeting has ended. Our correspondent is confirming that. We should have the news flash on. The Reserve Bank board meeting has ended. All members are now leaving the headquarters. So we will try and see if there is a statement that is issued or we get some indication of what were the issues that were taken up or discussed. But on this particular issue of whether the RBI ought to be a board-managed institution or not, Anant, very quickly, you just heard from Surjit Bhalla. He believes maybe the time has come. Gemini Bhagwati very categorically stating N capital, O capital, T capital. Your views?
So look, I think the de jure position is that in reality...
you misquoted me.
Okay,
what's your position?
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Surjit. Go ahead.
Just answer what... Yeah. That I think you misquoted. I did not say at all, and I do not believe that the RBI should be managed like a company. I think that is completely wrong interpretation of what I said. What I would like the other members, including Germany, with capital N, capital O, capital T, to answer the following. Let me phrase it rather than you phrasing it. Would they prefer that the board be a rubber stamping institution or of words to that effect that Lata used, or should it be different from that? Nobody's saying they should be managed, and indeed, if you look at the RBI Act, which is often quoted, it gives equal powers to both, and indeed the language assigning responsibilities to the board and to the RBI governor are identical. So let's not invoke the Act. I just want to ask a simple, genuine question, which I'm obviously tussling with and other people are. Should we go on with business as usual? Not that treat it as a company. Whoever said that the central bank is a company, nowhere in the world is the central bank a company. That is not the analog. The analog is, should the RBI board be a rubber stamping board that nobody even knows who the members are? They should never voice their opinion, and the RBI should continue. That's the question.
No, Mr. Bala, I take your question and you have phrased it for yourself. It is just that the way in which the board is organized, there are three gentlemen from the corporate sector at the moment. There is the Sun Pharma managing director, there's the Tata Sons chairman, and there is a gentleman who was the CFO of the Mahindra and Mahindra group. To expect that they will advise the governor to the extent of even having the right to direct the governor and the RBI will be too much. Yes, they can, of course, I'm sure, give advice, which I'm sure they must be. Yeah. But the nature of the board, and then in the past, there was Abul Kalam, the scientist turned president of India. There were social workers. Ela Bhatt was there. The nature of the board is a microcosm of society, and therefore to give it the power to direct or anything mandatory will be a little difficult, I thought, given the construction of the board. Your thoughts, Prabal?
I'd much rather have an accountant on the board than a social worker. This is not... Yeah.
No, I mean, at the moment, that's how it's structured, so we can't do much about it. But let's get the other people's views as well. Prabal Basu Roy, what would your thoughts be?
Lata, I think my thoughts are very clear on this. It's an absolute no-no. That's a non-negotiable, according to me. That the independence of the Reserve Bank of India governor is taken away through a board-managed entity. Let's put it that way. And as you rightly said, the way the board is structured at the moment and has been over many years, we've had chairmen of companies which are highly indebted. Being on the board, for example. In the current case, of course, you did mention that Chandra and Bharat, both of them have, in their group companies, NBFCs, etc. So you can't have such people giving regulations on things like things which impact their companies directly. So that's, I don't think, was the purpose of the RBI board in any case, as is currently constituted. And it's a complete no-go as far as the independence is concerned. However, having said that, I would, purely as a common citizen, I would say that the RBI governor maybe needs to be more communicative, and communicate not only with the public, but also with the government on many issues. I think the communication and this one-to-one talk of explaining why things are happening the way they are happening in their wisdom. I think that is important, and that is a place where maybe Urjit Patel's has been slightly deficient, if at all.
Okay. Well, Anand,
but independence of the governor, absolutely non-compromisable.
Fair point, Dr. Roy. Anand, why do you think it has become such a huge standoff? As we are all discussing, a little or more, a reduction or increase in controls on weak banks, or a little or more liquidity, more or less liquidity, is not an area in which compromise is so difficult to find. Is it that is it a communication issue? Or is it that the Reserve Bank tried to do too much, tried to clean up probably years of NPA accumulation in one shot? Is it something as severe as the February 12th circular that has rankled so much that it has brought more opposition than is normally the case between RBI and government?
Well, Lata, you're absolutely right. I think each of the issues which have come into the public domain are not beyond rational compromise. These issues have come in the past. Past governors and finance ministries have pondered over them and quietly resolved this behind closed doors. Unfortunately, a lot of these issues have come up in the public domain with a lot of rancor associated. PCAs and NPAs, the simplest solution, get the government to commit to bringing in capital into the PCA banks. 70% of Indian banking anyway is government owned. As long as that commitment for capital comes in, there's no reason why RBI cannot relax a lot more on PCA guidelines. Likewise, on liquidity, as you rightly mentioned earlier, the RBI is already doing a lot. If there is something specific that's required by way of a line of credit to SIDB or to NHB or to some other specific NBFCs, that can be always be discussed. Likewise, on reserves, again, on reserves and on the board coming in and becoming a lot more activist, so to speak. While, by the way, I think there are rational arguments to suggest there is excess capital on the books of RBI. And that the de jure position is the board, whether we like it or not, is a signatory to the annual report which goes out to the government saying this is what we have done as RBI. There is a case for both these situations, but it's not the right time to do this. If you do something right now, the government will face the charge that they are doing something precipitate just before elections. To make a change like this, which is a departure from years and decades of practice, you require committees to go through this. You require consensus to happen. Otherwise, it doesn't matter who's right, who's wrong. The benefit of doubt will go to the RBI, and a government facing an election 6 months will be seen as the villain, whether we like it or not. So there is a rational ground here for people to reach a compromise and move on. Make it beyond personalities, get to the hub of the issue, and try and resolve them.
Well, after nearly 9 hours, the crucial RBI board meeting is ended. We are expecting a statement from the central bank shortly. What we are given to understand, and this is, of course, source-based information that agencies are reporting, that the Reserve Bank will take certain measures on improving liquidity. This was, of course, expected, as our colleagues had also been reporting, that both as far as the PCA framework was concerned and on liquidity as well as MSMEs, there might have been a meeting of minds. Remember, the Reserve Bank of India Governor Urjit Patel met with the Prime Minister. That meeting took place last Friday, and the understanding was that perhaps on some of these issues we would see some forward movement, and that is what we're given to understand, that at least as far as improvement of liquidity is concerned, we could see some action being taken on the part of the Reserve Bank. But we're still waiting the official announcement. The statement is expected from the RBI. Let's very quickly go across to our colleague Ritu Singh. Ritu, so 15 minutes, is that what they're saying?
Yes, we're given to understand that RBI will be issuing a statement on the proceedings of the board meeting in a few minutes from now, about 10-15 minutes. So, it looks like it's not as inconclusive as the last board meeting was. Perhaps some of those decisions that you mentioned on liquidity, perhaps on especially with respect to NBFCs, etc., it's likely to have been taken up and some decision may have been reached. Do remember some of the critical issues surrounding the prompt corrective action, relaxation of Basel III norms, the capital structure of RBI, some special package for MSME. All of these are understood to have been taken up at today's board meeting. So that statement from RBI will give some clarity, because today's board meeting was a carry forward from the previous board meeting that remained inconclusive. Today, this was almost a 10-hour-long meeting, so one does hope that at least some of those issues would have been ironed out. We'll wait to hear more from the Reserve Bank of India and its official statement, which, as I said, is expected in a few minutes from now.
Okay, so let me once again, for the benefit of our viewers, recap what we are hearing, that the RBI is likely to take measures to improve liquidity, and the Reserve Bank is also likely to take measures to ease the restrictions on certain state-run banks' reserve ratio. Again, these were what we expected the RBI as well as the government to have arrived at some middle ground. Ananta, quickly let me get your reactions on what you make of the statements that we're picking up on.
So far, Shireen, sounds like good news. I do hope that they clarify a few things. One is that Section 7 is off the table, that we'll no longer hear about these threats of Section 7 being exercised. Second, hopefully we have committees being set up to discuss contentious issues. including the question of excess reserves on RBI's balance sheet and the possibility that the board might become a lot more activist. And then finally, things that you mentioned, if the RBI is doing more to infuse liquidity and can keep liquidity on an even keel, more power to it. I don't see any problem with that.
Okay, actually, I think this is a misreporting
outcome, hopefully.
Anant, I think this must be a misreporting. Some agency has said Reserve Bank to make measures to ease restrictions on certain state-run banks' reserve ratio. I mean, I don't think they could have meant reserve ratio. If the RBI is indeed giving a CRR cut, it's not something that will be announced like this. I think they mean something else. They probably mean
probably PCA
prompt corrector
guidelines
action,
being eased up, right?
Rules are going to be
PCA,
eased
yeah,
somewhat.
exactly. PCA, that's right.
No, but I think calling it the bank's reserve ratio is serious misreporting, because that language reserve ratio would mean something else in banking context. But liquidity increase, Mr. Bhalla, about 40,000 crores of OMOs are being done every month. I just calculated what you spoke about, the reduction in dollar reserves. And you're right that is amounting to about 2 lakh crore if you looked at the amount of dollars that perhaps have been sold off. And compared to that, I think the OMOs year to date have been 1.26 lakh crore, assuming they will do another 40,000 crore in December, which looks very, very likely. We would still be short of the amount of dollars that have moved out of the system and therefore created some kind of a liquidity tightness. What do you think the Reserve Bank could do? Is this also a situation where a CRR cut is called for?
I think what it needs, any central bank, it has to be concerned about growth as well as inflation. No central banker has yet come out and said, certainly not in the last 5-6 months, that inflation is a problem. Certainly all people here and everywhere else, I don't know about the RBI, have said that growth is a problem, liquidity is a problem, and the lack of liquidity is hurting growth, occupations, jobs, all the normal things that a central banker should be concerned about. So I think this is a positive step, that if they are, and as I'm glad you pointed out, I mean, given the nature of our economy and such low inflation, what rationale is there? And I'm asking this not a rhetoric question to all the other experts. What rationale is there for tightening liquidity in this situation? That's the question we all need to ask.
But just on that point,
has the RBI followed a rational monetary policy?
Okay. Well, outside of the monetary policy, what we were given to understand ahead of this board meeting, and perhaps that news flash that you're seeing on your screens, as Lata pointed out, it may not be elegantly written, but there may be some relaxation as far as the PCA framework is concerned. That was the expectation that North Bloc had ahead of this meeting, going into this meeting. So that perhaps is what we are going to see being cleared. There's going to be no statement from North Bloc, so no statement coming in from the Finance Ministry this evening. That is what we're given to understand. But the Reserve Bank should be making a statement shortly on what was decided and deliberated upon. Do we have Mr. Bhagwati with us?
Shireen, I just want to point out there are a couple of more things.
Yeah, Lata, go ahead.
Yeah, there are a couple of more things that Reuters is reporting. Reserve Bank to form a panel to review Reserve Bank surplus funds and transfer to government. So Reserve Bank to form a panel. Is this the board panel, or is it an RBI? Will invite experts and set up a panel? We don't know. But certainly capital is going to be an ongoing issue that is going to be discussed. They're going to set up a panel to decide how much capital should be with the Reserve Bank and surplus transfer as well. Maybe some formula will be hammered out. Professor Bhagwati, what would be your response to both this? Okay, we'll get to Professor Bhagwati in a minute. Prabal, what would your thoughts be? How would the RBI approach liquidity, the one that we were discussing with Mr. Bhalla? As well, is this a good idea to have a committee for the capital?
See, as far as the capital is concerned, Lata, I had said in the beginning itself that we should not, this is an absolute no-go in terms of transfer of reserves, unless unless we do two things. One is reevaluate the capital adequacy framework of the Reserve Bank, given the risks we face. And we do have a risk framework in place. I think it was done by the Thorat Committee, the Maligram Committee, etc. So, therefore, that needs to be revisited in the view of the risks we face. That is one. And second, the usage of the capital which will get released. These are the two important points which, if there's a committee being formed, and if it's a neutral committee with, with proper representation, there is nothing wrong with that. And in fact, that is a way forward. Okay. But this is to, this will affect the balance sheet of the of the RBI, which, as we know, needs a AAA rating because the country does not have a AAA rating, right? It needs a AAA rating. It has helped us very much in the 2013 crisis for the FCNRB swaps, etc. So therefore, messing around with the balance sheet should not be done in a tearing hurry. That is the limited point. Okay. And I don't think any committee which is formed can take such a major decision in the next 6 months. Yeah. It is just not possible.
Yeah, exactly.
And I hope that is the way they will address this issue.
Take your point, sir. Yeah. In any case, about 70% of those reserves are revaluation reserves. So if there is yet another reason for the Reserve Bank to spend dollars to, then automatically the revaluation reserves could come down. And therefore, I guess it's only the remaining part of retained earnings where maybe there is some leeway. Anand, first, would you agree with that actually we are discussing 2.5 lakh crore? And secondly, what ideas for liquidity? Some pace of OMOs has been being done. Now, if you suddenly double the OMOs, then you also distort the yield curve a little seriously. So what are the ideas for easing? What do you expect from the RBI?
So the first part I agree with. We're talking about 2.5 lakh crores of contingency funds, and we can't decide this overnight. This has to require a full thought-through process with a lot of independent people coming in and weighing in. So I think that's a good step if they're forming a committee. Whoever forms it, it's great. Let them take their time and try and finish this off rather than come with a half-baked suggestion, which again leaves things open to interpretation. On liquidity, look, a few things can happen. Just a quick clarification. While the RBI has intervened to the extent of $46 billion since this fiscal year, it's sold a lot of dollars to defend the rupee. A lot of it has been in the forward market. So what's actually hit the spot market is a small portion of that. And therefore the liquidity impact of the spot intervention is only about $17-18 billion, which is about, let's say, about 1.5 lakh crores. So it's not too far off from where the OMOs are happening currently. Plus, remember, the RBI has also given a lot of leeway on LCR, on excess LCR relief for those banks which are lending out to NBFIs. As you mentioned, it's also giving term repos. Actually, money market liquidity is not a problem. For banks that are looking to lend, it's not really a problem at all. Now, if more needs to be done, so be it. I mean, we can always push more liquidity. I just hope they don't go into the situation of actually lending out money to NBFIs, etc. I don't think they can even do that. Even nudging the banks further to lend directly into specific NBFIs is frankly something RBI should stay away from. It's not an entity to take credit risk or to direct credit risk, especially when we don't know what the actual state of assets on NBFIs is, which we'll not know for many months going forward. So, but given that, pushing money markets into a situation of comfortable liquidity within the ambit of all this, I think is absolutely fine.
Right, and there's another line coming in saying that the meeting ended on a cordial note. So that's good news, saying that the meeting ended on a cordial note. We will have to, of course, wait for more color on the issues that were discussed, taken up and cleared. We're waiting for the RBI statement to come through. But, I think there was consensus on the panel on one issue, that this issue of the reserves should be dealt with by a high-level committee, an expert committee, and now the Reserve Bank stating, or at least that is what sources suggest, that there will be a panel that will look at that issue. Mr. Bhalla, a quick word from you on that?
No, I think that's very welcome news. And therefore, the meeting has ended up with moving forward and communicating. One of the panelists had said that, this RBI is not very communicative. So maybe that will also improve. So far it looks very good.
Well, before we bring you more voices of influence, let me go back across to Lata to talk about the items on the agenda of this crucial board meeting. Lata, let's discuss the issues before the board. Now, as we've heard the finance minister say, liquidity, specifically NBFC liquidity, as well as the MSME space and the problems plaguing the MSME space, these are likely to be the two priority items on the board's agenda. Give me a sense of what issues within these overarching themes are likely to be taken up.
Well, I guess liquidity is going to be a very important issue. I mean, I don't know what more the Reserve Bank can do, but, that there is a strain on liquidity both in the banking and in the NBFC space is something the government will want to drive home about, and therefore the board members as well. The Reserve Bank has bought government bonds of 40,000 crores both in October, and another 40,000 crores will be bought in November as well. That's a lot of liquidity they have pushed in. You know, when you buy the bond, you push in 80,000 crores of liquidity. This year, they have already pushed in about 1,26,000 crore liquidity. And I'm sure they will say that they will continue to keep that pace. They've also done longer term repos, 56-day repos, 28-day repos, so that, market participants have assured money, 2-month money from the Reserve Bank. So a lot has been done, and I would assume that the Reserve Bank can give a commitment that it will continue to keep the system well hydrated. A second point, what I'm saying is that a middle ground can be found over there, with the RBI saying that we have taken your note of your concern, we will take note of your concern in the future as well. A middle ground can be found. With respect to specific NBFC liquidity, I think even the government now is would be of the view that there is no need for special liquidity. Nobody is even talking about any crisis in the debt market or a contagion. In fact, we had Keki Mistry on the channel telling us that the need for a special line of credit is now over. That event is past us. And therefore, my sense is that will not be raked up too much. The issue you mentioned is most likely to come, and that is the SME issue. I think over there, the Reserve Bank can extend a helping hand. I mean, they may not be able to do things like, recognize NPAs after 180 days or things like that. But even in the last 1 year, the Reserve Bank has given packages that those who have registered for GST, their bad loans will be classified as bad loans only after 180 days. They could extend that concession till March 31st. It's not very difficult for them to provide some kind of a concession for loans under 25 crore or under 5 crore, or however they define SME and MSME credit. I think middle ground will be found there. Middle ground is a little more difficult in Basel and in PCA. If they were to, be insisted, then there can be a lot of rancor, because Basel from 1998, we have kept minimum capital as 9% and Basel requires 8%. So, over 5 governors and over 5 governments, NDA, UPA2, NDA, okay, 4 governments, the same thing has prevailed, and therefore it may be very difficult for the Reserve Bank to change it now, something that stood the test of 20 years. And likewise in PCA, maybe some concessions could be given, but I don't see much, because all those PCA banks, most of them have reported such horrendous numbers in the second quarter. It may be a little difficult, but middle ground can definitely be found in MSME or, in liquidity. So, an olive branch can be, I think, from what I hear from people who have visited Delhi, you would know this better, it seems to be more an ego standoff as well. I mean, we keep talking and they're not listening, seems to be Delhi's point of view. So perhaps even if they are heard and, some concessions given, maybe things will sort out. Let's hope for the best.
Well, I'll tell you, the word that we were hearing here in the corridors of power was statesmanship, the need for statesmanship. Let's see if both sides come to the table with that mindset. But before we go any further, 2 former RBI governors, Raghuram Rajan and C. Rangarajan, on the current standoff with the government, as well as the importance of the independence of the central bank and why the board can only act as a sounding board, as an advisory board. It should not direct the governor to act in any particular direction. Take a look.
In a sense, the way it has evolved is that the Reserve Bank board has been more advisory in character rather than deciding on specific issues. Therefore, that is the nature of the board, and that is the nature of the way in which decisions have so far been taken. I would think that that evolution is a good evolution, and that is a way in which the relationship between the Reserve Bank headed by the governor and the board should be. Important change that has happened, which has given autonomy to the Reserve Bank of India in terms of monetary policy. The finance minister gets to know what the change in the policy rate is along with you and me. And therefore, that is an important change that has happened. Therefore, I would say in the present situation, Section 7 should not be used because it will give wrong signals. It is time for the government and the RBI to sit together in a spirit of accommodation and find answers to the problem. Section 7 should not be used now.
I worry that in the recent past, a lot of unnecessary noise has been inserted into the board deliberations, and I wonder if this is something that can be unwound or rolled back, perhaps by taking away some of the people responsible for the additional noise. I think it's important for both sides to back off, and for some, hopefully, elder persons in the government as well as former RBI people to create a better understanding between the two, and it may, again, I say, require looking at what has prompted this sort of recent angst and trying to deal with that problem. And I think Dr. Acharya should be commended for just sounding a warning. I don't think that I've seen a lot of press saying he's comparing India to Argentina and so on. I don't think that was his intent in any way. I think he was just saying, let us be careful in these uncertain times. That's a warning that is important for us to heed, and heed it in the way it was given, respectfully, recognizing the fact that the RBI is not above the government. It is an arm, if you will, of the government, and saying, look, as a responsible part of the government, it is my duty to warn that there are certain sort of issues if we go further. The RBI is something like a seatbelt. As a driver, the driver being the government, it has the possibility of not putting on its seatbelt. But of course, if you don't put on your seatbelt, you get into an accident. The accident can be quite severe. So most drivers listen to that annoying noise which comes when you don't put on your seatbelt and actually put on the seatbelt because they know it's for their own good. And historically, the relationship between the RBI and the government has been precisely this.
Here is a rare interview. Veteran Chartered Accountant Y.H. Maligam, he has served for 21 years on the board of the Reserve Bank of India, and he believes that under the current laws, that means under the Reserve Bank Act, the RBI board cannot direct the governor. To put it simply, Mr. Maligam says the board can persuade, but it must stop at persuasion. Take a look.
Now, even for that matter, for instance, there is a demand from the financial sector players that a line of credit be given by the Reserve Bank to NBFCs, non-bank finance companies. Now, there are two members of the board at the moment, Mr. Chandrasekaran, chairman of Tata Sons. They have Tata Capital, an NBFC. Bharat Doshi of M&M, they have MMFSL. It would be conflicting, isn't it, to allow a board like this to tell the governor that you do this for NBFCs?
No, that is one part of it. As I said, one is the question of interest. The other thing you've got to remember is that the Reserve Bank has multiple objectives. Yes. You have monetary policy, you have inflation, you have exchange rate, amongst many other things. And in fact, there is this well-known impossible trinity.
Yes.
If you do something in the monetary policy for affecting inflation, it has an impact on growth. If you do something for growth, it may have an impact upon foreign exchange. So there is a very difficult balancing act which has to be done. And it can only be done by professionals who understand these things. In fact, if you look at the Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission,
Yes.
it examined this whole issue of why do you need an independent regulator. And it has given 4 reasons or advantages of having an independent regulator, of which 2 are, in my opinion, very important. The first one says you need that regulator because the regulator has specialized officers, staff who have domain knowledge of that field on which regulation has to be done. So here you have in the Reserve Bank central bankers who understand these things. Board members don't have that sort of expertise. And second, and very important, they have said that this provides for a stability in policy, because otherwise, if that policy was made by the government, it would be subject to changes with any political changes which take place in the government. Now, these are all the reasons why, ever since the Reserve Bank was formed or nationalized from, say, 1969 till now, I am not aware of any situation where the boards of the Reserve Bank gave directions to the government. They make a very important contribution by giving advice. They are a sounding board for the governors, and the governors actually use that. They listen to them. Without revealing what they intend to do, they discuss various options with the board. They get their advice on matters, but the final decision still remains with the governor.
But still, there would be the act would have expected some voting to happen. After all, it says that the 2 government nominees are non-voting members. It says that the deputy governors are non-voting members. So voting is envisaged under the act.
But it's not as if the board doesn't have powers on certain matters. All I'm saying is it traditionally, and the tradition is also as important as the actual provisions of the act. Traditionally, board members have not made any directions on policy, but they can make directions on administration. They can make directions upon other matters which are concerned with internal management. That is where the question of voting may come in.
Now, God forbid, if it were to happen that on November 19th, because some board members have strong views on some issues, they vote and pass a resolution asking the governor to do something, either loosen the controls on banks or give a special line of credit to SMEs. What can the governor do? Can the governor say that please go back and make regulations and come? This is outside the purview of current regulations.
I can't tell you what the governor will do.
Would he be within his powers to say that?
Theoretically, he could ask for a legal advice as to whether this is within the competence of the board or not.
Okay. Well, that would be an important help that he will need. Do you think that the Reserve Bank board in the November 19th meeting or in any subsequent meeting be able to influence any of the policies of the governor? Can they, can the board's advice be set aside by the governor?
You see, what I feel correctly is the correct position is like this. The members of the board are knowledgeable people about the industry, about the social problems, etc. So they can give valuable inputs to the governor and the management as to what they feel should be the right policy, what they feel would be the consequence of their policy. They can persuade the government, the management in a particular line. But they have to stop at the point of persuasion. They cannot direct. That is the point I'm making.
Okay. Well, that is the message there from Y.H. Maligam, the longest-serving director of the Reserve Bank of India's board, 21 years, saying the board must stop at the point of persuasion. They cannot direct the governor.